Today's video is for my parents out there. If you have access to this video and you are a parent or a caregiver or somebody who is responsible for feeding kids, come on in, get cozy. This one is for you. If you are faced more than once or twice a week with the stress and thought that your kids just don't eat what you want them to eat, dinner time is constantly a struggle. If you're like so many folks who have joined my Facebook group and answered those questions there, when I say, what is your biggest challenge about dinner? Overwhelmingly, it seems like even more so recently, maybe that lines up with the pandemic, or we're all at home more, or feeling like our options to eat out are less. Increasingly in the last 2 years, the answers I get to the question of what is your biggest stress about feeding your family is that you make one meal and nobody eats it. I have seen that so many times that when I started Ends and Stems, my goal was to help people reduce their food waste, either to save money or as a climate action. But the pushback that I was getting, or the feedback that I'm getting, is that people can't find the time to think about their food waste because it isn't the pressing issue. The pressing issue is that your family won't eat what you make them. So I want to tell you a new way to think about it. It's not actually new. I'm using, a psychologist from the 80s, but I'm going to explain in modern terms and in my terms the division of responsibility at dinner time. And maybe this will actually free up so much time. This is an amazing situation where the answer to your stress is to do less. It's awesome. I'm going to give you less to do and take a weight and just get rid of it. I also am going to tell you one of my favorite analogies, why your kid's dinner plate is like a networking event, and then how to plan around that. And of course, we're going to touch on meal planning and why meal planning is the key to making your family dinners easier and eventually setting your kid up to eat more food, but without you having to do any of the work. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about today. So first thing, let's actually start with getting up to make your kid another meal. So what I want for you is, as the parent, caregiver, the person who consistently feeds a child, what I want for you is to make one meal, set it on the table, and not feel pressure, guilty, confused, concerned, sad, frustrated, angry, any of these feelings about whether or not you should get up and make your kid another meal. This is really, really common and it comes up a lot, and I completely understand. So I have a 4-year-old who is not a great eater. He really isn't. It's just true. He's really choosy about things, and he's nervous to try new foods, and he really just is not a kid who like dives in to try new foods. Even giving him dips doesn't make him try new foods. But so I completely understand that feeling when you put food on your table and your kid says, I'm not going to eat this. And then you worry, it creeps in. And are they healthy? Am I getting enough vegetables into their body? What if they're a failure to thrive, a medical term for not gaining enough weight, not growing enough, not building bones? What if I'm putting food in front of my kid, they won't eat it, and then they demand something different? How could I, as their parent, not feel like I need to provide them nourishment, right? Isn't that my job as the kid's parent, to make sure that the food that I'm serving them is what they're going to eat? But I have a different way of thinking about this. So we need to actually go back a few steps. I don't want you to be having these thoughts at the dinner table after you've already made food, put it on a plate, and put it in front of your kids. I want to walk a few steps back so that when you're deciding what goes on your kid's plate, when you're in a few steps back, even further than that, when you're in the grocery store making decisions about which food comes into your house, that's the point where you alone, without your kids watching, even if they're in the grocery cart, you're the one who's deciding what to put in the cart. Those are the times where you're making the decision about what's going to go on everybody's plate, not once you serve it and they demand something else. Because you count too, right? You've done this work to put food on the table, no matter what it is. Even if you bought takeout and you take a slice of pizza out of the box, put it on a plate, and give that to your kid, that's work, that's time, that's money. You still have to think about what's for dinner. You count too. You should not have to go through all that and then get up out of the fear or worry that you're not nourishing your kid to go make them something else. Even if you get up and go make them something simple like a peanut butter toast, you shouldn't have to do that. You get to sit down and you deserve to be counted on that list of, who's cared for at dinner time. You don't have to get up and get them something else. So what are you going to do instead? Well, obviously meal plan. Come on. You're on my page. You're going to meal plan. But, we'll go through all of that. When you're deciding what's for dinner, even if you're not, fully on my meal planning game yet, you as the parent are the one who decide what goes on your kid's plate. So you want to set them up for success in approaching that plate before you serve it to them. If I were to serve my choosy eater 4-year-old like a turkey chili with peppers and black beans, he's not going to eat that. He's not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole. So it would be silly of me to make that alone for dinner and put that down in front of him and then expect that he eats it. But on the other hand, we have to factor in the rest of the diners at our table, and we want to eat at a certain level. We want to eat interesting things. We want to eat a variety of colors and flavors. So how are we going to mesh together the veggie-packed turkey and bean chili with what, the lowest sort of common denominator in willingness to eat is going to do? Well, during the time that I am prepping that food for him or for the family, we're going to be setting things aside and kind of isolating components of that meal into basically building blocks of a plate that I know he will be willing to eat as well. So what are the components of a chili? Well, there's carrots in there. There are black beans. Maybe I'm going to put bell peppers in there. I'll put celery in there. He'll nibble at all those things minus the beans. Also, there's turkey. So when we're doing the turkey, maybe I'm sauteing that and then plucking a few pieces out at that point. I'm dicing up the carrots and dicing up the peppers, and I'm putting a slice of bell pepper aside, because I know if I give him a piece of bell pepper on his plate, he'll nibble on that piece of bell pepper. It's just too much for him if he gets a straight up bowl of chili. So his meal is the same as ours in that it's going to be all of the same components, but maybe I'll add a dinner roll or some cheese on the side or a scoop of yogurt to kind of complete his meal, while we have a proper bowl of turkey and vegetable chili. He'll have the components kind of arranged around the side of his plate. So while I'm going through the process of cooking, a nice grown-up meal, I'm also separating out for him so that it makes it easier to give him a plate of things that he'll eat. Which brings me to, and we could talk about this forever. I talk about this a lot on various platforms, and in my Stress Less Family Meals course, we have like entire sections on how to break down recipes like this and how to think through what to put on your kid's plate. But first, an analogy, my favorite analogy. Think of your kid's plate like a networking event. Okay, so I actually like networking, but I know that maybe I'm a little bit of an outlier. But I still resonate with this too, because think about you're sent to a networking event for work. You don't know who else is going, but you have to go. So you're all ready and you walk into this room and there are dozens of people. They're broken off in their little conversations, and you sort of scan the room and you need to go and participate, but nothing here is familiar. You don't know if you should get a drink, but then you don't want to be awkward. Are people having alcohol? Are they not? I'm not sure what to choose. And then you're just awkwardly holding it. Maybe appetizers are going around, but you don't want to fill your mouth if you don't know anybody. People are having all of these conversations, and you just hear the very intimidating murmur of people at this networking event, and you're not really a part of it. That's super intimidating, right? But what happens when you look up and there across the room, you spy somebody you know? Immediately, you make a beeline to them. You go over there and you're like, "Hey, Julie, it's so good to see you. How are you?" So even if she's already talking to somebody else, she opens up a little bit and she lets you in. She's like, "Hey, Allison, it's been a while. How are you? What's new? How are the kids? I saw you on Instagram. I know you started worm composting." So I immediately attach to somebody, even if I don't know them very well, but I attach to somebody familiar. And then all of a sudden I'm brought into the fold of this networking event. It doesn't matter if everybody else there is a stranger or somebody I don't know, they sort of fall away to the side because I've kind of found my comfort zone. I've found my place and I've found somebody to help me know that this event is for me and I do belong here. So think of your kid, especially if they're, really picky eaters, think of their plate as a networking event. When they first, my kid recently is marching into the dining room, Mom, what's for dinner? I'm like, well, your plate's on the table, like, please sit down, and then we'll, get to our meal. That's the rule. They need to come in, they need to sit down. So he looks at his plate and you can just see he scans it and he's like, peas, no, don't want them. Mashed potatoes, don't like them. Turkey, don't want it. And he's looking around the plate and then he sees his little King's Hawaiian roll. We call him Bao Bao. He loves them. He sees his dinner roll and he goes, okay, fine. And he grabs it and he starts eating it. And you can see he visibly relaxes. So even if the other foods on the plate are, a range of challenging to him, maybe some of them he knows he likes, some of them are brand new, a slice of radish. He really is not going to like that. But, I put it on his plate anyway. Because he found his friend, he found that dinner roll, he bites into it. He starts visibly relaxing at the table because he knows this plate was in fact made for him. He is invited to this place. He was considered in this plate and he has a place here. And then, the other part, and this is the last part we'll get to, is what is the division of responsibility at dinner? What is the parent responsible for? What is the child responsible for? He starts relaxing with his dinner roll and we start talking. How was your day? Did anything funny happen? How many times did you get to go out on the playground? My daughter who's in elementary school, did you have art? Did you have library today? Tell us about that. Like, what did you draw? And nobody's really paying too much attention to him. Next thing he knows, he's trying another food. He's maybe moving up the scale of how intimidated he is by certain foods. And he's willing to try new things because he had that friend on his plate immediately. Right? Let me know if you have any questions about that, if that resonates with you. I think it's a great analogy. And if you've ever been like the solo at a networking event where you don't know anybody and then you spy your friend, like that moment. Okay, so the third thing we're going to talk about today, the division of responsibility. So this was developed by a woman named Ellen Satter. You can find the Ellen Satter Institute. I think she started it in like the late 70s and the early 80s. So this is in no way my psychological research or like original work, but it's a very commonly like accepted piece of feeding kids and strategy about raising kids and feeding kids. So I really think it's great. I like to talk about it. And then as I prefer with any sort of overarching like parenting guide or, parenting strategy, make it your own. So you can keep kind of the framework and then apply it to your family and apply it to what works for you. I don't think you need to, buy into anything 100%. There's always room for finesse and for your family, and not only for your family, but for your values, for your lifestyle, what's important to you and what you want to teach your kids, because, again, you're a factor in this. So basically what she says in the division of responsibility is that it is the parent's job to provide food that is plated, which I personally really like the fact that it's plated and it's in a certain place. But the parents can also decide where, they decide when, and then they decide what food is served. So at the beginning of this, what I was saying is when you're in the grocery store, this is when you're making those decisions. What food comes into my house? If you don't want your kid to eat Oreos, or you don't want your kid to eat, snap peas, you don't bring those items into your house, and then it's pretty easy for your kid not to eat those things. But you decide what goes on their plate. But then that's it. So after the cooking, after the food serving time and place, and the fact that there is food served to them is done, you can't do anything else. And the reason I like this so much is because as much as you want to rally against this, like you could try to disagree on this, that no, the parent's job is to make sure the kids eat their vegetables, or the clean plate club, or any of those things. You can't do that. You cannot force your kid to eat a stalk of asparagus if that's what's for dinner. You can't do it. You cannot move their mouth, make them chew and swallow it. So having a strategy that is aligned with literally what you can and cannot physically do just takes so much weight off your shoulder, right? You don't even have to think about this anymore. Your kid is then responsible for how much they eat and which items on their plate they eat. The other thing as a parent you can be responsible for is sort of the behavior and the norms at your family mealtime. So another one of the parent responsibilities that I really like is making dinner time fun and pleasant and happy. What vibe do you want at your dinner table, right? Are you super duper like way back old school where kids should not be spoken to? Or do you tell jokes? Do you allow screens? We could debate that, whether or not that's appropriate, but ultimately that's up to you. Do you allow that? Do you allow your kids to bring a book to certain meals and maybe not other meals? You set the norms for what your family meals look like. Do the kids eat at one time and place and the grown-ups eat at another place? There's lots of reasons why eating together is helpful, but maybe that doesn't always fit into your life. But the point is you decide the bigger picture of what is served and when, and they decide of what is served and when, how much and which of those items to eat. If you give them, a giant heap of mashed potatoes and 3 pieces of broccoli, and they really don't want to eat any of it, you can't make them eat anything. You can support that later by making sure that you're not then allowing them to get up and eat a bag of Doritos, because then obviously they're not going to learn to try new things. But you control what is presented to them. And if you start that with a plan and, sort of a few steps back, again, when you're grocery shopping and meal planning and figuring out what is the family meal going to look like and how can I set my kids' plate up so that they have a friend at the table and they are invited into their meal, you can then really just enjoy yourself at dinner. And you can set the example. This is how we eat. This is how we talk about food. This is how we treat each other, how we talk to each other. This is how we laugh. These are the stories we tell. You're then in control of those things, but not actually what your kid eats and puts into their body. And the really, really challenging part of this, especially if you're trying this new and your kid is a picky eater, is trusting that your child wants to eat, that they want to learn to eat, and that if you can do this consistently and without putting pressure on your kid to try new foods, try it now, or there's no dessert, and that kind of more old school thinking, they will eventually eat. But the challenging part is staying really consistent and trusting your kid, especially depending on whatever your baseline is now. This may be a huge leap. You're not currently trusting them because you want the best for them, but you're unable to sort of trust that they will eat because you're thinking, yeah, but they don't eat, so they won't eat anything. So if you're that far back and they don't eat and they won't eat anything, this is where, again, you really start out slow and set their plate up. Maybe if you have 4 components on their plate in total, maybe if they're really not good at eating yet, maybe 3 of those 4 components are big favorites. And then you slowly work up to getting the plate that looks more like the family meal. But again, back to the beginning, the other really important part of this is that you can slowly start to implement, and I would recommend talking to your kids and telling them that this is sort of the new way it is. I'm going to serve dinner. I am not going to get up and make you something else. If you don't like what's served, I don't know what to tell you. There will always be something on your plate that you love. This is what's being served. This is what's for dinner. You can ask as many times as you want. I'm not going to get up and make you something else, and you can't have snacks, and you can't have something else. This is what dinner is. And then you trust yourself to know that, you basically deserve not to have to get up and create something else. But you've set yourself up for success by making sure that their plate has things on it that they will eat. So that's sort of the loop. Let me know if you have any questions. If there's any pushback, I'd love to hear if people feel differently. But basically, the end goal is to try this division of responsibility where you decide what is served, what time, and where. And then your kid decides from what is served which things to eat and how much of those things to eat and whether or not they eat anything. And you slowly can get everybody eating the same meal because you're really the puppet master, right? You're the one who still decides what's on the plate. And then you stay strong and you don't get up and you don't make them anything else. The other rule that I have, again, I have a course that's multiple weeks and we go through all of these things in detail with like hands-on strategies and worksheets and all that kind of stuff. But the other part of it is when you explain to your kids that this is the new policy, I'm not going to get up and make you something else to eat. The other part of the rule is if you want more control over what we're having for dinner, you can join me when I meal plan. So I will be meal planning on X day. We're going to decide what's for dinner for the whole next week. If you want to help me pick which vegetable or which fruits I'm going to buy, if you want to help, recommend a meal, if you want to say, I want quesadillas or I want pancakes, great. You can do that when we're meal planning. So before I go to the grocery store and when I write the meal plan, you can have that input. But at the moment that I put food on your plate and serve it to the table, that is way too late. And I will not be getting up to make you another meal because I also deserve this time to sit down and talk to you. I want to hear about your day. I want to hear, if you learned a new word or told any great jokes today. So I'm not going to go back to the kitchen to make you something else. This is not the time to do that. So this, again, can be really hard if this is all new, if you're not there yet. But there are small ways you can kind of start to implement these changes, and then you draw the line and you don't go backwards. And then eventually, some kids will learn to eat faster, but it really just takes a long time. Okay, that's it. I'm talking too long. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will be happy to follow up either in the comments or with an additional video. Thanks so much for being here.